Let's go ahead and move on to start sit Pittsburgh Steelers edition. We just hit on the Bears. You brought up Ben Roethlisberger as a start this week. The Steelers do play Cincinnati here in Week 15. Let's walk through some of these options for Pittsburgh, starting with Big Ben. What are you doing with him this week?
I'm definitely tempering expectations compared to where he has been performing. I'd have him as a mid-range QB2 this week, so not a guy I'm super high on. Would probably have him in the streamer category. I put him right there neck and neck with Mitch Trubisky, which is why I brought him up when we were comparing them, because Big Ben's efficiency has really dropped off a cliff. The run game hasn't been able to get going, which has caused the Steelers to need Big Ben to pass more, but it's not turning into anything crazy. His average at the target is extremely low, one of the lowest he's had in his career, but he's still throwing the ball a ton, which is where the appeal will come from. Then you add in the Cincinnati matchup. Steelers should win this one pretty handily. They've lost 2 straight after going undefeated up until then so far this season. So I'm expecting a big bounce-back game, divisional matchup. They're not going to lose to the Bengals. So with that being said, I think they're going to put up points. Big Ben's going to do it. It's just part of the reason why we weren't huge on him on draft day is because we know the Steelers defense is going to be able to put up points and stifle the opposing offenses, which stops Big Ben from getting in some shootout game scripts. If Joe Burrow was healthy and active for the Bengals, maybe we're looking at this one as, okay, this is going to be a high upside, high flying game. We're going to see some points scored here. But the way that team is going, I don't want to start Big Ben in this matchup unless I absolutely have to. Guys I'm willing to start over Big Ben this week would be our boy Mitch Trubisky. I might even look at Jalen Hurts, Phillip Rivers, maybe Derek Carr against the Chargers, high over-under in that game. Definitely Jared Goff against the Jets, Ryan Tannehill against Detroit. And we'll talk about Taysom Hill a little bit later, but those are all names that I would throw over Big Ben this week. How are you feeling?
Yeah, that's interesting because I just hyped up Mitch Trubisky, and I still said I'd probably start Ben over him, but that's where I draw the line. I think Big Ben's a little bit safer this week. You look at what they did against Cincinnati in Week 10, they dominated 36-10. Yes, Joe Burrow was active, but they couldn't get anything going on the ground, so they just kept throwing the ball against the Bengals. And in a blowout game, Big Ben threw the ball through the whole game, ended up as the QB3 on the week, 29 fantasy points. So I think the upside is there this week. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's more of a safe play. I think he's a lock for 15 to 20 points here in Week 15. So if you need safety and you just need a baseline, if you have a dominant team and quarterback's a question mark, you just can't have someone completely suck. Like Trubisky's range of outcomes is literally 0 to 35 points. I'd say Big Ben's is a little bit tighter than that. So if you just can't get like a total dud at the quarterback position, Big Ben's someone you can lock in. But if you do need a riskier option, some of these names you threw out, Jalen Hurts, Taysom Hill, Mitch Trubisky, I think are definitely in play. Let's move on to the running back position. I mean, James Conner, Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland, Jalen Samuels. I know James Conner's a big name, but there's no chance I'd start him this week. To me, he feels like Todd Gurley last week. We said we're not touching Todd Gurley with a 10-foot pole. If you plug him in, it's a trap, and he's going to totally blow you up, and we happen to hit on that take. I think that's James Conner here in a game against Cincinnati that feels like a total trap. He's been bad. They've used a rotation of running backs. No way I can start James Conner this week. I'd rather start Jeff Wilson, who I know we've talked a lot about, and we'll talk about him in our start sits. I'd rather start J.D. McKissick in a PPR league. So I'm benching James Conner if at all possible. Do you agree with me there?
I am. Now, if he doesn't start, are you looking at guys who have been disappointing?
No.
Just the matchup against Cincinnati makes it so appealing where, if I was relying on James Conner, I think I would be willing to put in Benny Snell. I probably wasn't relying on Conner to carry me to a championship, but I just need a guy who can be a startable RB2.
It's bad,
can be good
dude.
for 10-plus points, but you're right. These guys are bad. They're inefficient. They're not getting it done.
Look at the last game against Cincinnati, too. I mean, the matchup's good, but James Conner was active for that game. 13 carries, 36 yards. Snell, 3 carries for 12 yards. I mean, the Steelers as a whole had 2.2 yards per carry against the Bengals in Week 10. So I don't care who it is. We saw Snell look absolutely atrocious a couple weeks ago. Got stuffed on the goal line like 4 times in a row a couple weeks ago against the Washington football team when they got upset in that Monday night game. So I'm avoiding this Pittsburgh backfield at all costs. I think there could be some value in the receiver group with the pass catchers. But, yeah, sign me up for any running back other than a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Assuming James Conner was at full health, where would we have him, right? Like 18 to 24 on the week. I think Snell is even a downgrade from that. So, no, these aren't really guys that you want to start, not even desperation flexes. Give me an upside name like a Michael Pittman or even Chase Claypool on his own team if we're talking about the Steelers as guys that I would rather put in a flex spot over James Conner. He's just not getting it done. It hurts to see because he's such an inspiring story, but not a guy that I'm in on. And we saw a lot of people earlier in the year taking hard victory laps over drafting James Conner in the third round.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been a guy who just saw what he did that year when Big Ben threw the ball 700 times, literally set the record for most pass attempts, and said there's no way that pass volume is going to be there. And on top of that, he's been injury prone. So just been a guy that I've been fading. You've been fading. We liked him at some of his values, throughout the summer before draft season, where he was kind of getting depressed value-wise and then was coming back up. But let's talk about the receivers here. We know we're starting Juju Smith-Schuster. He's been quietly producing at a consistent level, sitting at the wide receiver 19 on the year, and that's about where we would expect him to be at this point. That's where I would expect him to be on the week. Just a solid wide receiver 2, not going to go off for 35 points or anything like that. He's not going to take over the game Devontae Adams style, but he can be serviceable. He's going to see the highest amount of targets, and if he scores a touchdown, which he has been hot with those as of late, that'll just add to what he's able to do. Again, going back to like the over-under and the Steelers winning this game, Juju's going to benefit from that because Deontay Johnson, the guy we need to spend a little bit more time talking about,
Oh my gosh.
has been disappointing. Both the Steelers fans, fantasy
Deontay Dropson.
Deontay Dropson. Wow. I mean, that's really his story at this point. Is dominant when he's healthy out there on the field, but had 4 drops early in the game. I'm sorry, 3 drops, 3 crucial drops on third down, high leverage situations against Buffalo in week 14. Ended up only playing 47% of snaps in that game, was pulled off the field because the team just couldn't trust him. This is the NFL. If you're not getting it done in the NFL, if you can't not catch a pass, then your value as a wide receiver is pretty much nothing because they can't move the ball. They're burning downs. They're going to take you out of the game. That just kind of is what it is, no matter how much the team likes you and how much you've done. I'm hopeful for Deontay Johnson. I think this week he's a fine start. I would expect him to be in that wide receiver 1 range. But the floor is lower than most wide receiver 1s because if he struggles with the drops again, the team's more likely to take him out because they've already seen it before. Could also be a situation where, if he fumbles, if he makes one mistake, it's a high likelihood that he's going to disappoint you from a fantasy perspective. How are you feeling about DJ?
Yeah, I mean, this one's tough. Deontay Johnson, when healthy, was absolutely crushing it for your fantasy team. But you got to remember, Deontay Johnson, I mean, this was like the breakout year for him. This is the year he was rising up draft boards. He was that mid-round pick. It's not like this is a proven guy who's done it time and time again and is just struggling. So, I mean, he leads the league in drops. He's, this is as close as you can get, it seems, to having the yips as a wide receiver. He just can't catch the ball, and he's in his own head, and it's making it worse. We saw what happened last week, and he dropped the pass early. Doesn't come in for quite some time. And the problem with Deontay Johnson is the Steelers are so talented at the wide receiver position. They have Juju, they have Claypool. James Washington can play that outside receiver spot as well. We saw James Washington come in. He scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. So I'm not dropping Deontay Johnson, but I'd rather not start him this week. If he comes out, like you said, if he makes an early mistake, it could be the last we see of Deontay Johnson for the game. And what's even more concerning about the snap share last week is going into that week, Mike Tomlin comes out and says, hey, I know we've struggled with drops. If you can't catch the ball, we're going to get guys on the field that do. And Mike Tomlin's one of the most no-nonsense coaches in the NFL. We saw Deontay Johnson come out and drop a pass, and Mike Tomlin backed up his word. He got him right off the field and let him think about that drop for quite some time. So I believe Mike Tomlin when he says if you're not going to catch a pass, you're going to come off the field no matter who you are. And that clearly applied to Deontay Johnson last week. So I'm trying to avoid there. I'm with you. I'm starting Juju. I think Claypool is kind of one of those boom or bust flex type options. He's, a big play guy, one big play, and he could make or break your week. So if you need the upside, I'm willing to roll out Claypool, but I would definitely temper expectations after what we've seen from him over the past few weeks. And I think Eric Ebron, with how thin the tight end spot is, I know he struggled with drops as well, but he's a must start at this point. The volume is better than we're seeing from most other players at the tight end spot. Targets for Ebron, let's just count backwards, 5 last week. Before that, 11, 7, 6, 6, 5, 8, 4, 6, 7. So all season, Eric Ebron's been getting targets in a good offense. I think he's a must start at the tight end spot.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's right at like the tight end. He's sitting at tight end 9 on the season. I'd have him right above there in terms of where does he stack up this week because, Kittle's out and some of those other studs have some tough matchups. So he's right there. He's definitely a guy you got to plug in. Last thing I'll say on the Steelers team, I think just the way that I play fantasy, I am plugging in Deontay Johnson this week. Unless I have some stud wide receivers. Like if I'm looking at, my roster and I have Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson, even like Mike Evans, all of those type of names, I'm sure that I'll bench Deontay Johnson, but more than likely you don't. If you're in a 12-team league, 14-team league, you're not going to have a ton of depth there. I think you'd have to. Deontay Johnson's kind of like one of these guys like Julio Jones. I know that's a big comparison to make, but I say that to say, look, if they start, you play them no matter what because they can do some really crazy things.
Deontay Johnson or T.Y. Hilton against Houston this week?
I'll go Deontay there.
Wow. I'll take T.Y.
I know T.Y.'s been hot, but I can't trust
We'll talk about him later.
Interesting. All right.